What is up, guys? Sorry for the lack of uploads, but I haven't been feeling myself the last couple of days. Now, I tried to make this video like legitimately 3 times, but first time I screwed up one of the recordings, and then the second time I changed my mind on one of the weapons, and then I changed my mind again. And you know what? As you guys know, I'm somewhat of a connoisseur when it comes to weapons. But you know, instead of jumping on the train of the hype, I decided to just, wait a little bit, just give the weapons a little bit of time to settle in, so we can sort of feel out the space and actually come to a conclusive determination as to whether or not these new weapons are great or horrific or both. Who knows? They're definitely cool. So anyways, in today's video, we're gonna be taking a look at all of the new weapons, making a little bit of a couple of experiments, a bit of science, weapon science, and hopefully draw some conclusions. I'm also working on a way more detailed guide. I did the beginner's guide on the 𝒮𝔴𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝔮𝔮𝔞𝔡. I'm working on a way more in-depth, sort of heavy guide where I go through all of the different abilities, whatever you want to call them, traits that you can select throughout the 𝒮𝔴𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝔮𝔮𝔞𝔡. Try to categorize them, try to, say this is good for this class, this is bad for that class, so on and so forth. On a scale from epic and broken to broken and epic. How broken and epic is Chain Lightning then? And my, just estimating here, but I'm pretty sure it's epic and broken. But anyways, that's not for today's video, so let's get to it. Now, in today's video, we're gonna be rating all of the 5 new weapons on a scale from 1 to 10, both in terms of their viability and in terms of their overall awesomeness, to the extent that that is possible. Now, we're starting out with Kruber and the Spear and Shield. Now, I haven't purchased his new skin yet. I'm going to. I have purchased the Shades one, but I'm also going to purchase his one because I think it looks absolutely amazing. But we're not here to talk about the skins. We're here to talk about the weapons, right? So, first of all, the Spear and Shield for Kruber. Now, this weapon has one inherent weakness, which we'll talk about momentarily. But let's start out with its viability versus infantry. Now, versus infantry, there are 2 potential combos. A heavy into a light, cancel repeat, which is usually what I'd be using to initiate, but then more commonly you're going to be using the light cancel as a follow-up, right? And I think it's really great for that. So as you can see, this is a really effective combo. It gets the job done. It's fairly easy to perform if you know what you're doing when it comes to attack canceling, block canceling, sorry. And assuming you know how to do that, assuming you don't, then it's simply to perform a very quick block to reset the sequence. So you attack, block, attack, block, attack. As you can see, the stamina shields appear for just a tiny second, and that just means we're resetting the sequence. Now, really the weakness comes when we're going into the armored minions. Now, there are 2 ways to deal with armored minions. There's the first, which is the most basic and sort of most obvious one, which is the same combo you'd be using on the Elf's weapon, which is the push block attack into a heavy attack. But this sequence has an inherent flaw. And 𝒮𝔴𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝔮𝔮𝔞𝔡 has a really good video on this, where he talks about sort of the action time of certain attacks and sort of I'm going to simplify a lot here, but essentially the weakness here comes down to the fact that in the attack animation of this attack, this sequence, right? If I want to block in this sequence, there is a very long window in which I'm unable to input a new thing without that input being sequenced after the animation. What that means in common English is if I want to block now, I can't. If I want to block at any point between here and here, I can't. If I try to block, it literally won't let me block until the animation is finished. So here I'm prolonging the animation just to explain it, right? But from here to here, but in the normal time of the animation, I'm unable to input a block. So it has to finish playing that animation. And what that essentially means is there's a very long window in this combo in which I'm unable to input my block. If I suddenly realize, oh shit, there's a 𝒮𝔴𝔞𝔤𝔢𝔯𝔮𝔮𝔞𝔡 heavy attacking me, I need to block, then I can't. And that is the inherent weakness of this weapon. Of course, there's also the block and weapon special. Now, in order to do this attack, you need to first be blocking, then you need to use the weapon special. And you don't have to hold down block whilst you're spamming the weapon special. Like right now, I'm just clicking weapon special. But you need to be blocking to initiate the first one. Now, unlike in the weapon, unlike in the closed beta, every time you're actually hitting a minion, it now costs 1 stamina or half a shield, similar to the billhook. And that's way more balanced, let's be real about that. This weapon was absolutely broken in the closed beta. They also changed the damage profile of the attack to, you know, more realistic values. But it's still a really, really great feature. I think this balances the weapon out a lot more. And I still think it's a great feature. Of course, it now runs into the problem of this attack not working unless you have stamina. And obviously, since you're blocking, you're going to lose stamina when you're blocking, which means there's an inherent timer on this weapon, right? As soon as you run out of stamina, it doesn't work anymore, right? So you can't just do it endlessly, which I think is it was the right thing to do. As much as I loved the broken feature, it is a lot more balanced this way, right? I think this is a great weapon. I think I would rate it on a scale from 1 to 10. Let's just set the scale first. On a 1 to 10 scale, where 1 would be weapons like the Elven Axe, it would be weapons like the Crowbill, it would be weapons like the one-handed axe, it would be, you know, those weapons. If they represent a 1, and a sword and dagger, a billhook, the longbow, if they represent a 10, right, on this scale, that is to say, a 10 is not 10 times as good as a 1. That is just, it's a proportionate scale, right, which means we're only researching the area between the worst and the best weapon, and going the worst weapon 1, best weapon 10, right? So that doesn't necessarily mean the best is 10 times as good as the worst. Just want to make that clear. But on that scale, where the worst are the examples I just gave, I would probably give this weapon something like an 8. In light of the weapons that Krupa already has, I think this is a really viable weapon. I think it performs a lot of functions really, really well. It has a nice little niche feature. I think in terms of overall coolness and awesomeness, I'd give it a 7. Mostly because of the stance that you have with the weapon, where it's like, Hua! But I think it's a really viable weapon. Obviously, you can't use this weapon on the Grail Knights, so keep that in mind. This weapon only works for the 3 other classes. But I think it's actually really viable on all of those 3 classes. And so I think overall, I'd give this weapon an 8 in terms of its viability and overall strength. Really great weapon, really love it. Let's move on. Next up, we got the Trollhammer torpedo, which only works on the Ironbreaker and on the Engineer. Now, in the closed beta, this weapon was absolutely broken as fuck. Now, they have implemented a little bit of sort of something you could overlook, right? The first recording that I screwed up, right, was because the first thing I did was I spawned a boss, and I was like, guys, watch this trick you can do. And it wasn't working, and I was like really confused in the middle of the recording. I was like, why did this not work? And it's because I hadn't read the fact that they changed the armor-piercing slugs so that now it's listed as non-explosive ranged attacks. Pierce 1 additional enemy. Because before, what you could do is you'd have an explosion effect both on impact, and then it would pierce through it, and then it would explode again when it hit the ground, right? Essentially allowing for a double effect. Now, this ranged weapon is really, really strong. Like, first of all, it can literally stun lock a boss. Like you can actually, if you know what you're doing with your movement, even versus a Minotaur, you can actually completely lock, even when you have aggro, you can actually completely lock a boss in position, right? That is to say, you can actually reload fast enough and move fast enough that you never have to actually deal with the boss. You know what you're doing. There's a couple of important things to note about this weapon. First of all, if you haven't watched my guide on ranged mastery mechanics, I think it's called, there's an effect where right after you attack, you double tap R. That's really important. That forces in the reload mechanic, and that has a significant effect on this weapon, and that actually can easily be the difference between whether or not you have the time you need in between, even with a fast boss. Obviously you want to, I hit it on the wrong side there, but otherwise you can still do like this, control it. But yeah, you want to do the R double tap right after you shoot. Also, you can block with this ranged weapon. That's a new feature as well. That's unique to this weapon. You can actually block attacks. Again, boom, fairly effectively. It does not gain the block cost modifiers that you have on your main weapon. So that's worth noting as well. This is a great weapon. Okay, let me make that straight. Like the stagger effects of this weapon on a boss, in of itself, make this weapon absolutely worth it. Okay, I think it is by far the strongest melee weapon, ranged weapon, sorry, that the dwarf has right now. Oh shit, I missed that attack. That was kind of sad. But like, just look how easily you can control the Minotaur because of his charging animation being longer. Which I could just completely control this Minotaur. Now I'm out of ammo, obviously. But if not for the ammo deficit there, then just it is so easy. Would you please reload? Thank you. Then it's so easy to control the Minotaur. Like, it is so easy. As soon as you push him away, it's just... a Minotaur is like, it's just completely locked out, right? Of course, you still have to worry about your back, but you can block with this ranged weapon, which just, obviously, you can't reload it while you're blocking. Let me make that clear. But I think this is probably his strongest ranged weapon right now, alongside the crossbow. Obviously, it fills a very different niche than the crossbow, so they're hard to compare. But on the overall scale of viability, I would give this a 9, 9.5 maybe. I think it's hard to place because of it's very unique, right? There's no other ranged weapon that has any comparable effect to this ranged weapon. I genuinely think that this is a 9, 9.5, maybe even a 10 on the viability scale. Like, this is a great weapon, and in terms of awesomeness, definitely a 10, right? Definitely a 10. So I think this is an absolutely amazing weapon, definitely viable, and yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about that. Moving on to the Moonfire bow. Now, I have a bunch of stuff to say about this weapon. Now, first of all, obviously this weapon does not use ammunition. If you take the whole bar, it has a full of 4 fully charged attacks, right? So you can do 4 fully charged attacks in a row before you run out. But there's a really interesting effect which I want to showcase, which actually gives you a sort of a free extra charged up attack. Because let's just wait until it's fully charged up, right? Okay, so you fully charge the bow, you go 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And it's out. However, if you give the bow just a little bit of time, we're just going to wait until it fully replenishes. But essentially, you can get in... how can I explain it? Okay, let's say you have half a bar, like 1/8 of the whole bar, right? So in other words, half of what a fully charged attack costs. Sorry, welcome to the squad, 𝒮𝔞𝔤𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔡. If you have half of what you require to do a fully charged attack, you can still do the last charged attack, assuming you're already... to the 𝒮𝔞𝔤𝔤𝔢𝔯𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔡. Welcome to the squad. I should have said that. Assuming you're... that was so distracting, actually. Assuming you're already in the motion of doing an attack.
Welcome to the 𝒮𝔮𝔲𝔞𝔤𝔝𝒮𝔮.
This is almost comedic at this point. Assuming you're already in... like, somehow I will get to the end of this sentence, okay? Assuming you're already in the midst of an attack, you can actually do the last attack, despite the fact that you only have half of what is needed. So let's say instead of doing 4 attacks in a row, I do 1 fully charged attack, then I wait a little bit, and then I do 1, 2, 3, 4. You saw. Despite the fact that I just, I had that tiny bit, and I could still do an attack, right? And so you can actually get an extra attack in by making sure that your overcharge, I'm just going to call it overcharge. I know it's not overcharge, but that's what I'm going to call it. For the sake of simplicity. Assuming you have an asynchronous amount of overcharge, you can actually get in an extra attack at the end by just, having that little bit, 1, 2, 3, right? So that's worth noting. I think this weapon fills an interesting niche. I think it is almost certainly true that this weapon is not as strong as the longbow. Let me just put that. If a longbow is a 10, like in terms of viability, I would probably put this at a solid 7, 7.5. Maybe an 8, but I think that's stretching it. It's also worth noting that they've changed it so that, let me just spawn something like, and I'll get back to the viability in a moment, don't worry. Let's say I kill this thing, then you actually get the extra attack for free, which makes it really good on a waystalker, right? Because I actually just need to kill a minion here, and then I get 2 shots, but it only costs the overcharge of 1, right? So that's worth noting. It's also worth noting that they changed it, so Kuno's reward. Let's just spend all of our overcharge here. You see, that actually replenished. Our overcharge. So they changed it so that works now, right? As it should. And actually gives us... Why is this not working though? I spilled half a liter of coffee into my keyboard the other day, so I need to clean every single one of my keys, not even kidding. But yeah, so that works, right? Which gives it even more validity. But in terms of the overall effect, I think it doesn't quite replace the Hackbane, and it doesn't quite replace the longbow. It is sort of a pseudo combination of the two. I think the strength it has, it lies in the fact that you have infinite ammo over time. However, you don't get sort of the added boss damage, for example, of finding an ammo crate with the Hackbane where you can just spam as much as you want, right? You don't have that effect. And so you also don't have the same spammability of obtaining stacks of barrage, for example, right? So it definitely has some Achilles heels. I don't think this replaces the longbow. I don't think it replaces the Hackbane, but I think it is viable in its own right. I think it's a great weapon. I think on the scale of awesomeness, it is a solid 10, no doubt about it. Best looking ranged weapon in the game, by far. I absolutely love it, and I encourage that you guys use it. Myself included, I will be using it for sure. But do I think it's better than the longbow? No. Do I think it's better than the Hackbane? Possibly. But not, but I'm still, the jury's still out on that. But it's definitely not better than the longbow, in my opinion at least. So I would give it a solid 7 to 8 on the viability scale, and a solid 10 in terms of awesomeness. But anyways, let's move on to the Griffin foot. Now, this is a weapon that I'm a little bit split about, right? Because on one hand, it feels awesome. It is very much... Like, it has a lot in common with the Bracer pistols in that it has the same movement modifiers, right? So it has infinite dodges. I believe it has the same range on the dodge distance. I can't actually check it in the armory. Actually, let me just double check that. I think it has the same. I feel like it has the same. Yeah, I think so. Regardless, it's close at least, let me put it that way. I'm pretty sure it has a 25% dodge distance modifier. It reloads 2 shots per reload, so it has that going for it. It's amazing for taking out things like monks up close. But where the problem with this weapon, and the reason I would only give it something like a 4, maybe a 5 in terms of actual viability, is because the one thing that this absolutely sucks at is things like stranglers, right? See, like, the most important function of a ranged weapon is the ability to take out specials at medium to long distances, right? Because at close distances, you could melee the special. And in order to viably one-shot a strangler, you're literally in melee range, right? Which means it doesn't really have a useful niche, with the exception of sort of spam taking out things like monks, right? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying you guys shouldn't use it. I'm not saying that it can't be viable. I'm not saying that it's so bad that you shouldn't or can't use it. You definitely can. What I am saying, it's just that it's not, on the overall scale, I think this is a worse Bracer pistol, because it just lacks that semi to long range damage that allows you, like, just think about it, you can't really reliably take out a Blightstormer. Even with the crit modifier, that it's not a reliable kill on Legend at any noticeable distance. And that means even despite the fact that it has the added effect that Bracer Pistols doesn't have of a bash attack, like shotguns, which does give it a little bit of extra in terms of assassin control, for example, being able to bash it if you can't hit it, you know, when it's jumping you. It does have that going for it, a little bit extra crowd control when it comes to dealing with sort of close-up trash minions. And sure, it has an insane amount of close-up damage and boss damage if you're just allowed to spam, but it doesn't really, it lacks the most vital niche of ranged weapons. And for that reason, I have to say, in terms of its overall awesomeness, I might give it a 7 or 8, right? But in terms of its actual viability, I'm gonna have to give it like a 4.5 at most. I think it's one of his worst ranged weapons. I think it's on par with the repeater handgun, which again is not an unusable weapon. It's a fun weapon that I like to use. I often use it. So, you know, you can do the one-shot Chaos Warrior build, and that's a lot of fun. But it's not as viable as his other builds, right? And I think this, the Griffin foot, or Duck foot, whatever you want to call it, finds itself in a similar category. Which brings us to probably the most disputed or uncertain weapon of this whole list, which is the Coruscation staff. Now, on one hand, I want to say this weapon is insane. On another hand, I want to say this weapon is absolutely horrific. Now, let's just start out with the left click, right? Actually, let's start out with the overcharge cost. So, the right click here costs 9 overcharge per fully charged effect, whilst the left click costs 7, which means that you can do a total of 5 fully charged area of attacks, and you can do a total of 6 left clicks in a row. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right? Because they cost 7 each, and you have a total of 40 overcharge. Now, here's the thing. I'm really split about this weapon, because on one hand, let me just find the Plague Monks on Legend, right? And I think even on Kata, I seem to recall testing this on Kata as well, and I seem to recall that it worked, but this is on Legend. You can one-shot, even with the reduced damage, 30%. And just to be clear, there's no dot damage on the left click, right? The left click is like a shotgun attack. It doesn't apply a dot. But you can one-shot a monk up close at decent distances, right? I mean, that is insane. Like that, there's no doubt about the fact that is insane damage. And I think it's insane even on an Unchained, right? Because you can build up your overcharge so quickly, and you could just one-shot those monks that tear through your overcharge otherwise, right? But here's the thing, it has no stacker. That is where it differs from the Conflag staff. And I think it is absolutely true to say that this is worse overall than a Conflag staff, and it does not replace the Conflag staff. However, we're gonna do a couple of experiments here. Let's just start out with here with the area of attack. Not gonna be perfect, but every single time I set this up ahead of time, what happened was I did something else that required me to remove minions and forgot all about this experiment, and thus I had to set it up anyways. So as you can see, just like with the Conflag staff, this area is actually way larger in terms of applying a dot, right? Essentially, the dot that you apply is roughly speaking double the size of the area. So if you imagine you have this circle in the middle, you can roughly speaking apply another circle, and that's the area in which you apply a dot. But of course, the damage over time effect is way higher inside the area, assuming that you get something actually stick on the location, which was not the case in the closed beta, which is also why I didn't make this video in the closed beta. That was primarily because I was so certain that they were going to change this weapon, right? In the closed beta, when you charged this up, it was as large as a Conflag, and you had 6 more animations in a circle around this, right? But just check out this damage, okay? This is on Legend, as I said, and this is with the Famished Flames. This is quite a bit of damage, right? If you just look on a single one, But this, of course, requires that you control the enemy minion, and that you're actually able to have the Chaos Spawn stick to its, spot, right? Now, this damage does stack over, like, when you apply several. It doesn't all stack, right? It's not, you can't multiply all of the numbers together, because the dot effect is only applied once, but the area dot is applied multiple times, right? If that makes sense. So you do deal more damage quicker if you have 2 than if you have 1, as far as I can tell. But it's not double the damage, right? So if I do this twice, that's not double the damage of doing it once. But it is more damage, if that makes sense. However, an interesting thing, okay, well, just try to note in your mind with Famished Flames how much damage a single charge up does, right? Because there's something interesting that, at least I find interesting, that I found, right? Look at the overall amount of damage and try to do a mental note. Okay, so it's roughly around the little spike. You look on the health bar, right? There's a little spike that goes down. It's a little bit on the right side of the spike. Now, let's do the same test, but with volcanic force. Didn't expect that, huh? The overall damage of getting 50% extra power on the charge up was actually more damage than getting plus 150% on the dot. And what that tells me is that, because this 150% is only applied to the dot effect that you apply to the target. That is to say, the area effect, the damage that is on the ground, right? So when you do like that, if this Chaos Spawn were to move now, there's a dot effect on the ground and a dot effect on the Chaos Spawn itself that's applied. And the 150%, plus 150%, is only applied to the dot that you apply to the target and not to the ground. Otherwise, this result wouldn't make any sense. And this tells me that a significant proportion of this damage is from the area effect on the ground. And actually, this makes me think that for this staff, it is actually better to get Volcanic Force than it is to get Famished Flames. Which was not my initial, which is not what I thought initially. Like, that actually surprised me. That's not how I thought that was going to work. So I definitely want to make a mental note about that, because I think Volcanic Force is actually better in almost every conceivable way than Famished Flames for using the staff. I may be wrong about that, but that's my current point of stand, whatever you want to call it. I think the problem with this staff, again, comes down to actually obtaining the effect. I feel like the Coruscation staff is in a very similar fashion to the Griffin foot. I think it's better than the Griffin foot, let me just point that out, but in a similar situation, which is that it has a huge potential that is hard to actually cash in on. You know what I mean? The potential damage you can dish out with this weapon is insane, but it's also really, really difficult to actually get that value. Because if you have an assassin running at you, right, and you compare this to a conflag staff, well, sure, if I place it perfectly, I may get a one-shot kill on the assassin super quickly. But in every other scenario, the assassin survives and jumps straight to my face. Whereas with the conflag staff, I need only hit in the vicinity of the assassin, and I at least have control over the assassin. That is to say, I know that the assassin is not going to be a problem. There is no stacker on this AoE, which means no matter your power, you cannot stacker even the lightest minion in the game with this attack, right? This is only a damage effect, only. No stacker whatsoever. But of course the damage is insane, let me make that clear. But what that means is that this weapon is very much dependent on crowd control from other players, on boss control, sort of, having someone actually do the whole Rat Ogre, for example, as you all have likely seen by now. Like, let's say I do like this. Sure. This is insane, right? Like, just check that damage out. That is what this staff can do. Oops. Wasn't comfortable about that one. There you go, right? Like, that is insane, but again, you can't always do that, you know what I mean? Because then you're fighting a Minotaur, or then you're fighting a Chaos Spawn, which makes it harder. It's still possible to do with the Chaos Spawn, but what I'm trying to say is that the damage is way more dependent. It's way more circumstantial. Circumstantial, is that a word? It's way more depending on circumstances, right? You get what I'm saying. And for that reason, I think it's not as good as the Conflict Staff overall as a weapon. I think I would rate it up between a 6 and 8. So I guess a 7, right? I think it has huge potential, but I also feel like it's hard to cash in on the potential. Because again, but let's be real, it's just absolutely satisfying to just one-shot smash a Berserker or a... that's not a Berserker. A Berserker or a Monk in the face, right? Let's just be real about that. Like, absolutely just satisfying, right? It's absolutely wrecking, absolutely just destroying Berserkers. But is it as good overall as a Conflict Staff? I don't think so. So in terms of awesomeness, definitely a 10 in my opinion, just because of the feeling of this left click attack. But yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed. We got, as I said, a way more extensive guide coming up on the Chaos Wastes that lists all of the effects and so on and so forth. And that's pretty much all I have for you guys today. And as always, I love you guys. Stay awesome. Peace out.